But to get to the point Mr. Cummings was raising, do you have enough resources to conduct sufficient investigation and oversight?
Well, we are building as an office. We currently have 70 personnel on board. We're building to about 160, which a target date of early next year.
I read your, not all of your report, but scanned through it, and you do have recommendations in here. I notice only 8 of 32 of your major recommendations have been implemented, and then 5 of 32 partially implemented. Is there any way to enforce implementation or to get us, do you have any recommendation that we can put some teeth into what you're doing or recommending?
Really, we feel like our role, our statutory role, is to make these recommendations, and that's
so
really
we have to pick up the responsibility. But it appears that a number of your recommendations are not implemented, or it appears that some of your recommendations take a while to get implemented. For example, executive compensation, was that, I guess that was finally adopted, a rule June 15th?
That's correct.
So that's why we've seen since June 15th a lot of folks interested in paying back their loans?
I think that is an explanation that's been offered.
Okay, but it took us, what, 6 months to get that in place, that recommendation implemented. Is that correct?
I think it was about 4 months from our February report.
Mm-hmm. Then I think part of what you said is you're trying to develop and encourage transparency. Many of the things that deal with transparency are recommendations that have not, in fact, been addressed by the various groups that you oversee. That still remains the case?
It does.
That's unfortunate. And then maybe finally you could tell me, first I didn't vote for it, but we started out with about $700 billion that members of Congress thought that they were going to help bail out financial institutions. And then you said it grew, some of the liability grew to $3 trillion. Maybe you could explain that. Then $4.7 trillion. And then the total exposure is $23 trillion. So how did a little tiny, teeny $700 billion program balloon into $23 billion worth of exposure? And maybe you could tell us the $3 trillion you cited level, how far we're at risk at that, 4.7, and 23 is the ultimate.
Sure. For the TARP, we start off with $700 billion, and we include a chart that gives the precise numbers for each program and where they come from. But then that number got expanded to approximately almost $3 trillion from other related federal government programs. So, for example, the public-private investment program, which we've been discussing, is seeded with about $100 billion of TARP money. But then the Federal Reserve, and at one point the FDIC, were going to issue non-recourse loans from the Federal Reserve, that is, loans that don't have to be paid back but are posted with collateral.
So that ballooned it too?
Right. And then also guarantees from the FDIC. You have the TALF program, which has been an up to $1 trillion program, seeded by $80 or $100 billion of TARP funds. So you have these other federal government entities coming in and supplementing these programs. You have an asset guarantee of $300 billion from Citigroup, which is done partly by Treasury, partly by FDIC, and partly Federal Reserve. So that's how we get to the $3 trillion. Those other numbers are actually non-TARP programs, or the $3 trillion actually, in the 23.7, it does include the $3 trillion from the TARP, but it also includes other programs that have nothing to do with the TARP, other than the fact that they are also supporting the financial industry, and other than the fact that the same institutions that can take advantage of the TARP also can take advantage of these other institutions, and at times can use one perhaps to pay off another. Something we call, it's something we've been coined as this bailout arbitrage.
So $700 billion seeded the potential of $23.7 trillion.
I would say the 700 seeded the $3 trillion, and then the other $20.7 trillion really comes from other federal government programs that are non-TARP related.